And welcome back, everyone, to Get the Mic. I'm your host on the left, Owl.
I'm your host on the right, Brock.
And today we're going to be talking about everyone's favorite robot, Ha-Chan.
Ha-Chan, Ader.
Ader, some of you might know him. He's a very memorable character in Dragon Ball, and he sticks around for a while.
I really like how involved he is with the story of Z.
Well,
Classic character.
I think there's a reason why we moved past him, but
Mm-hmm.
he is involved a little later on. But I think his spirit and why he's found in Muscle Tower is all interesting. Some interesting mysteries that we should be tackling
Mm-hmm.
today. Um, no housekeeping stuff really this week either, so we're gonna get right into it. First thing we see is Ha-Chan locked up in here, and we get a little bit of a recap from the last episode, which was 5 Murasaki's. The last and true Murasaki, who is unable to fool Goku with dissociation any longer, has to resort to freeing Android 8, who is described as a terrible monster by both the narrator and Sano's father in the last episode.
Says that he's a monster that's been in prison that grows more angry every day.
Yes. And so Murasaki decides to free him. And so we don't know what's going to happen. What can Goku measure up to this creature? He's got his eyes lighting up like that, right? So the mysterious android number 8. Anything you want to say about this part?
They set it up a little bit differently whenever they're doing the recap, They tonally shifted to be a lot more tense and foreboding whenever he sees him. They add a lot of lightning. It's constantly, every time you see him, it's another strike of lightning, another strike of lightning, another strike of lightning, which I think is actually a little bit symbolic of what we're going to see about him as we immediately find out what his spirit is going to represent.
It's an enlightening spirit or an enlightened spirit?
You
Is that
could
what
say
you're
it's
trying to say?
enlightened, yeah.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. It is on one level enlightened, and then we'll get into it as we see his reaction. But yeah, he squares off against Goku here, and both General White and Murasaki are pretty happy. They think that finally they found a worthy opponent that can best Goku. So Murasaki tells him to attack. He breaks off his chains. So he, unlike what Sano's father said, it doesn't seem like he was ever actually forced to be there. He could have broken out at any time.
Right, he asks Murasaki to undo his chains, and then he can't find the key, and he says, "Well, it doesn't matter," and just flexes and breaks all the chains off.
And he tells him to attack Goku. And Android 8's like, no, I cannot do it. I cannot do bad things.
I cannot do bad things. I don't like bad
and
things.
you are doing bad things, basically. He points all that out. And Goku's kind of just watching at this point, this interaction. But I do want to say, so if this is this tower is a manifestation of that spirit embodied by General White, that tyrannical despotism. Um, this manifestation here of Android 8, who is created by the Red Ribbon Army, what do you think that has to say?
Well, for one thing, he looks like Frankenstein's monster. That's the first thing that we see about him is that he's got the stitches on his forehead. He's got the flat sort of top to his head in the same way, and he's very large and lumbering, right? And so I think that's to say that this is the Red Ribbon Army's monster, right? That they've clearly wanted to create some spirit that's going to be completely bound to their will and can only obey their will, right?
Okay. Um, See, I was thinking it was important to mention the spirit of creation that's adopted by the despot, right? Um, but in this situation, right, the spirit of General White is not such that it can create life from life. Right now, we know later on in the dialogue that Ader was once dead.
Right. It says,
That
"Who
this is
gave you your new
reanimated
life?"
tissue.
Yeah.
And it kind of it's good that it goes back to Frankenstein because Frankenstein is that scientific tyrannical forcing life, right? Forcing and trying to adopt the role of God, right?
Mm-hmm.
And approaching that Tower of Babel level of arrogance. And that's exactly what's kind of happened here, except the manifestation here, Ader has a conscience and Ader doesn't, he won't do harm, he says.
It's that ghost in the machine, right? Where he has that, because he was alive before, there is that spark of humanity that is the inevitable humanity in him. And he had said before, the father had said before that he became angrier the longer he was locked away. When in reality, with that spark, with that ghost in the machine, it's only made him more human instead. And they've left him there to just believing that, oh well, he's essentially going to become more and more cold and calculated, and essentially his humanity will make him full of rage and make him resentful. That's exactly what they would think would happen because he has that spark of humanity, and instead, of course, it's the exact opposite.
Well, I think it's also to say that the spirit of this enlightened spirit that chooses not to do harm, right? It's or will not do harm even. It's not even chooses not to because he refuses to outright. It's kind of that idea of the meek shall inherit the earth, but that, as we know, is a bad translation. But he is meek,
Hmm.
right? He's definitely meek, but his meek purity is still above the deception of Murasaki. However, it's below General White's pathology, the despot, right? And so I think it's interesting here that this tower of despotism, this muscle tower, right, within it is contained that moral conundrum. And that's what he has here. He's an example of that muscle with the moral conundrum. He's kind of symbolic of the humanity that still can remain within this pathology.
Yeah,
He's that
I
white dot in the black
I was gonna say the
paisley.
same thing because it's almost like in the presence of Goku, right? It's immediately clear to him what is starkly good, right? And the story has been so far a lot about the reflection of Goku on other people, what they do with the fact that they've encountered what Goku represents. How are they going to deal with the weight that he, or the pressure that he exudes on their conscience, right? And we've seen that with Murasaki leading up into this. What's interesting is the opposite of it, right? The meek sees Goku for the good that he is, and in his presence is able to emulate Goku, whereas somebody like
His
Murasaki,
spirit
who
is
is
stronger
not
for it,
meek,
right? Yeah.
cannot do that, right? And so I kind of have been playing around with this idea almost that this is like a hand in hand sort of thing. Like maybe the causality that I'm looking for to see why eight is the way that he is, why he is meek, why he's able to have that enlightenment, I think maybe is tied to really his encounter with Goku, right? That him being that way and being able to interpret goodness that way is really um it's sort of tied into like this is such a good character that as soon as he comes into contact with Goku, we see that character in him, right?
Hmm.
It's kind of a weird causal thing, but I think you know what I'm getting at.
I think I don't know if his interaction with Goku has made him good. I think he was already that way by the nature of also think about why he's hidden away, right? Um White is hiding away any of the humanity that he has. He can't show that as a front, right? So instead, that part of him which is, let's say, still compassionate, pacifistic, all that, um, has become, like we've said before, part of the reign of terror because even Sano's father spreads these rumors about him which are completely untrue, right?
Well, it's really got me thinking because looking at the tower as this sort of microcosm of General White, it's almost like General White has taken his humanity and stuffed it into this other body, right? It's like all of his humanity, all
Well,
of
in
his
not just another
benevolence has
body,
been
right? It's in a dead body.
right.
It's something that he's pushing away to be dead and dying in a dark corner of the tower, not even on a specific floor, right? Um,
And so you've got sort of an android that has sort of been cursed with his humanity, and then he is a man that does not have his humanity anymore, and he's cold and calculating. He's more robotic, right?
exactly. And so when he refuses, General White says, "Destroy him," right? Destroy this part of myself that is betraying my motives.
I see. Yeah,
Right. Now it's coming.
yeah. It definitely works that way because it doesn't respond to Murasaki's threats, right? It says, "Okay, I'll just get rid of you if you don't toe the line," right? And by nature, he can't toe the line. I think that he's sort of a vessel for that hidden away piece of him, right?
Right, exactly. And so he can't even resist it. If White decides to destroy him, 8 can't do anything against that. And so then Murasaki tries to blow him up like we were saying. Goku stops him and uses the Janken. And I think Brock wants to talk about that. I'll let him talk about it cuz he was mentioning
I
it
mean, the
earlier.
main thing I just want to point out is that this is a pretty significant difference in translation between the Japanese and the English because the Japanese, when Goku finally defeats number one of the five Murasakis here, he uses the rock, paper, scissors technique and beats him with the rock. And in the English, he just kind of has a quip and punches him in the face. And, it's a funny little moment, but the fact that Goku beats him with the rock in the rock, paper, scissors technique finally at the end of the fight shows this was the level that he was on all along. It shows that he was never going to be able to compete with Goku in strength in any way, and he can't even compete in a fair game with Goku. Goku doesn't have to cheat on the rock,
In a
paper,
game of
scissors.
play, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
That if Goku is forthrightly setting the rules for him instead of the other way around, because that's what's been happening. He's been setting the rules for Goku. You play this game with me. You play this game. You play this game. Now Goku says, "All right, my turn. Here's the game. Straightforward, rock, paper, scissors," and beats him with his fist. Beats him with just the sheer strength that he has of spirit.
And that is the end of Murasaki as far as we know. Um and so then after Murasaki's defeat, Goku and 8 have a brief discussion about why 8 hasn't defended himself. And he says fighting is bad. Goku says if you don't fight, then won't you just end up dying anyways or being killed by those bad guys, something like that.
8 seems surprised at his inability to do bad things. He has to sit and sort of meditate on it, and he says, "I cannot seem to do a bad thing." Right? He says it in those terms instead of being like, "I'm programmed not to do this." It's something that's clear to him upon self reflection, which makes me think that it's sort of like, oh well, you know, with this line of thinking that I have right now, I'm addressing it to myself, right? That it's almost novel that he's got such a conscience.
Well, he's the entire consciousness.
Hmm.
He's the conscience that's hidden away
Well,
of White, right?
well, I want to say that because he doesn't seem like he's been self-reflective until he comes along and Goku
Well,
starts
he
asking him
he
about his nature, right?
he couldn't because he's locked away,
Exactly.
right?
He's in the dark, right? And as
Specifically,
Goku comes
yes.
up, he's being illuminated in that way by the lightning, right? And you think of what lightning kind of is symbolically with that enlightenment from the heavens.
Hmm. And so Goku and him have a brief discussion, and then Goku realizes that he needs to go save Mr. Village on that top floor. So he goes on without Ader, and he runs into a maze, which particularly confuses Goku. And we learn later why, and it's because White is able to switch up the maze. So the game is not being played forthrightly, but Goku isn't engaging with it forthrightly, and therefore Goku doesn't understand the game he's playing.
I think this is an extension of what we saw with the punishment as pinball before, right? Where Pilaf, he's playing music and he's controlling the pinball game, and they're sort of in his game, they're the ball in the pinball game. So he's orchestrating this experience for them, but they're not really able to interact with it a whole lot. And the thing that defeats the pinball is more of a symbolic gesture that has to do with Yamcha and Bulma, right? But this is much more for Goku, right? That the pinball situation was representative of Bulma and Yamcha back then because they were the main characters of the story at the time, right? But now this is the maze this is the game for Goku to be inside of that's being orchestrated by somebody else for him to overcome.
And it's a rigged game. And additionally, General White calls some soldiers up there, and Goku can't believe that he's already recognizing some things, like how it is that he goes down one path and then it's a wall the next time he goes down that same path, right? He's already starting to realize that, but he's just running around in circles, and he says it feels like he's constantly running around in circles.
Well, it's sort of the nature of his experience because he's embodied and he's within the confines of the framework of this game, and he couldn't. It's almost like he can't conceptualize that that there would be somebody engaging with the game on a higher level that changes the rules of his game without him interacting with that person at all.
Right. It's like
It's like having faith in the system,
the
right?
unconsciousness of the malice a kid is exhibiting towards an ant that he's burning with a magnifying glass. The ant has no conceptualization of that higher force, right? Not saying Goku's an ant here, but
Right.
that whole unconsciousness, yeah. And so Goku's not able to see, and this is additionally because he's inside of Muscle Tower, right? He's inside of the psyche of General White. He's inside the psyche of a despot.
Right, and so if we're sort of ascending the tower up towards the crown or towards sort of the mind of ultimately the logos of what's animating White, then this maze is sort of working. How would I say? It's almost symbolic of trying to understand General White's mode of being, right? And it's very complicated because General White has at this point worked out so many different reasonings and so many pathologies and so many different things to justify why he's doing what he is and who he is and what his identity is tied into because it's all this it, for Goku that would be absolutely 100% confusing, right? All of the complexity of the social identity and all of the uh I would say reasoning that belongs to someone who's a general in a corrupt army, right? So Goku's kind of struggling with the concept of him right here. He's struggling with the complexity
Well,
of
in
what
the
he represents.
instantiation of thuggery, right? Rule through fear and force,
Well, you
right?
can think of the pathologies that you would need to live that way, right?
And
So
those pathologies are able to shift according to let's say they're powerful in the way that they can move and wiggle out of circumstances instead of being faced directly. And so Goku tries to face them directly, but he's unable to understand the pathology that he's encountering.
and it also just has the power to frame to to draw the boundaries of w- what the person who's engaging with it operates within and to shift at will and control you could say to like control the conversation about the justifications of what they're doing. You're not going to convince, let's say, a general in an army that what they're doing isn't moral. They've already worked that out. Like they can turn those walls and change it around so that you're running endlessly around trying to find a way to convince them, and it's not going to happen.
Even if confronted with truth. But we don't actually see Goku use the Kamehameha wave here. theoretically he could, but there's a different solution, and that is the consciousness, the good, moral, and pacifistic spirit of 8 comes along to help Goku. That is nothing. Oops. But before that, we see another flashback to Sano's house. Wait, is that happens first? I think.
This kind of happens in this same sequence of events. So it goes back to Sinnoh's house, and I think it's really just a scene to show Sinnoh looking up at the stars and thinking about Goku and thinking about the last time that she saw him, and sort of reaffirming that faith that she has, that positivity, because I had mentioned before that her father just exhibited total negativity. And so she, being impressionable, we kind of saw her going back and forth on it. And so now she's doing that praying that they talked about, and saying, yeah, she's looking up and seeing him up in the sky and the stars, right? So she's wishing upon a star almost in this sense.
Mm-hmm. For Goku's his wellness. And I think, yeah, this happens right before he does get a an intervention in the form of 8, right? 8 comes up the stairs and it offers to help Goku. But before that, we do see as the audience, we see White manipulating the maze. Goku still doesn't know about it, but we do see White manipulating the maze. Particularly the exit. It's just one wall that shifts one way.
It's literally just a
It's
45-degree
it
turn for one wall.
Right, but it's funny that little fluidity in one's integrity will allow a lot of confusion. Just one little thing can
Yeah, and you
be
can
very
think of it like
confusing.
mental barriers. Like if you're trying to attack the issue from one angle and you come up against a barrier and you're like, well, maybe I'll attack it from this other angle. And the amount of time that it takes you to reapproach the topic, they've put up a new barrier defending against that approach, and they just go back and forth. You can't seem to
You
get them
can't pin
narrowed
pin
down.
someone
Yeah.
down, right? And that's exactly what Goku is best at when once he's pinned someone down, face them with truth and can confront them with his spirit. That's when we see Goku hasn't really failed so far in doing that. Metallatron has fallen to him, and Metallatron probably was the hardest enemy he's fought since Roshi in the tournament.
hmm
I would say.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely his most formidable spirit to come up against in that sense.
And that's because I think particularly Goku would be susceptible to that mode of being, becoming that. And that's why
Could
Murasaki is
be,
not
yeah.
as dangerous to him and only gets him with one real thing because Goku's not really in danger of falling prey to that spirit of deceit.
He would not fall prey to self-deception, which is, I think, necessary
But
for
being
Murasaki's mode of
used by
being.
someone smarter, being it possessed of strength ideologically,
And
that is
being pointed towards what you would believe are valid targets of justice when they're
aliens.
not.
Look, alien, exactly. And
Yeah.
so, that's I think that's really why Metallatron was such a challenge.
hmm
Weird that we're talking about that right now, but anyways, so they eight eight goes with him, and Goku names him Ha-chan, which I think that's 8, right? Ha is 8.
Yeah. It's basically just 8chan.
It's like 80 or 8er.
hmm
And so in the English it's 8er.
So it sounds goofy in the English. It's just like Aider, Aider,
8er,
Aider.
8er. Yeah. It's kind of funny. Either way, it's a silly name that Goku gives him, but
But
that
he gives him a name,
that
right?
name frees, and that's what Goku does is he gives names, right? He names things. He creates order out of chaos, especially because Android 8 is not actually a name, right? It's a classification.
Right. Well, I like how symbolic this is and why he's necessary for Goku to be able to move past this challenge, because by naming this disintegrated spirit, it's almost like he's taking the first step. You know, they say the first step is admitting you have a problem, right? defining what has happened here within sort of the microcosm of General White, defining that he has done this with his humanity, right? Defining that it's been placed into something that um, is a slave, right? That's been enslaved and is not a living, embodied experience anymore, right? Naming that and calling it into something that can be interacted with and grappled with as a concept empowers him to then be the key that Goku needs to get past those barriers of sort of self defense.
Well, a let I would like to add that the weakness in the spirit that General White is exhibiting can be pointed out by his disembodied consciousness in the form of eight, right? And it meaning his ideal good nature is judging his would be judging his actions, right? And can
His inconsistencies, right?
see through and point out his flaws, which is exactly what 8 does. He says, "Okay, well, let's see if he can hold these two things at the same time," and it's not possible.
Well, also, he does say that he saw a floor plan for this a long time ago and he should be able to navigate it, right? So this is familiar territory and he'll be able to notice those pathologies. He'll be able to notice the cheating happening, right? The shortcuts that he's taking in his logic.
And so he does, and they solve the puzzle and they get through to the other side.
It's
And
funny too that White is he calls them fools for doing the same thing over and over when he is the
doing the
fool
same thing over and
for
over, yeah.
trying to use this exact tactic over and over and losing ultimately because of it.
Right, and that's the exact thing is that White can't put instantiate his spirit in two positions at once.
Well, and
Up
because
come the oh, also up come these soldiers. I think this is a filler part according to the wiki.
there's not a lot that happens here. They just beat up the soldiers.
They beat him up, except 8 doesn't beat up anyone except one guy on
He trips a
accident,
guy and he smashes into the
and he
wall.
kills him. Here it
There it
is.
is.
He's dead. Unfortunately, he died.
He has an amazing jump through the doorway. I love that jump.
It's pretty great. So they fit through and they go up the stairs to the next floor. Except they can't go to the next floor because it is blocked off. It is hidden away. And that's going to deal with a lot of what we're going to talk about next episode because we thought that, White was done hiding away parts of himself here in this tower. No. There's a whole section of the pathology of the tower hidden away right now that we're
Not
going to
accessible
talk about in the next
without
one.
going up to the control room.
Exactly. Which is also significant. But I think we'll get into that one there. So Goku and 8 get to the control room and they confront White for the first time. And they say, "Hand us Mr. Village." And White says, "No, I'm not going to hand over
Where's
Mr.
Village? Give me Mr. Chief now.
He instructs 8 to attack Goku, I think, right? And he invites Goku to work in the army with him because of his he White can see the benefit of replacing Metallatron with Goku. He'd be a very good Metallatron.
Goku would be an incredibly powerful Metallatron. Well,
Oh, also the game over sign I just saw on this one. I guess we split it up a little weirdly. But
yeah,
just to mention real quick, that game over sign from the maze really was just him getting a game over in the mind game he was playing, right? Let's say the mental gymnastics he was performing, the judges finally gave him all zeros.
he just lost. He met his own failure threshold for the game that he was playing with himself, right?
Yeah.
And also, the explicit usage of a game because it is he's playing a game with him, but that concept of play we've talked about so much, it really does play that up whenever that's happening. The rock paper scissors, the arcade game. That concept of play is leaned into like 100% in Dragon Ball.
And White too is really still possessed here. He confronts Eight, and even though he still thinks enough of himself that he's going to be able to deal with Goku and Eight, he instructs Eight to attack him. Eight asks him not to do evil things anymore, right?
Well, 8 looks within himself. He sits there and meditates on it for a second, and then he says, "I just cannot do bad things."
Yes.
And then he warns General White. He says, "Goku's very strong. You should actually submit to him." And it's kind of telling here because this is wisdom that is coming from within White's knowledge now, right? Because uh Ader Hachan has ascended all the way up here to this like conscious point now, right? It's a moment of self-reflection for General White. And that self-reflection is telling General White, this guy's strong. Maybe you should chill.
Mm-hmm. And he doesn't want White to die, obviously,
Yeah, and
right?
I think that's why he reaches out to him that way is and he doesn't just bargain with him because he's trying to preserve his life as much as he's a protective spirit. He's all that is what he is functionally, and as soon as he's able to talk to White again, right, try to reintegrate with him, that's what he does. Is he sort of appeals to his self preservation.
And it doesn't work. White has a trick up his sleeve, a trap door underneath both Ha-chan and Goku, and he sends them down to the depths of the 5th floor. We're going to see what that entails next episode.
Well, first, I do want to point out though, this is whenever he points to his origins, right? He says,
Who made you? Yeah.
whenever he tells him to stop doing bad things, he basically calls him a failure of a creation and says, "Who created you? Who gave you life again after
And
you had
that's where
died?"
we see, we see the implication that he is reanimated tissue, just like Frankenstein's monster.
Well, the giving him life again thing, especially whenever we talk about that ideological programming that comes with this principality that he's manifesting, you could say, right? Is that to me it's attached to that ego death idea, right? It's when you were torn down and you didn't have an identity anymore. Who built you up? Who gave you a new identity? You belong to us. You're our robot. You're our android, right? We built who you are, who you identify as.
Yeah, I mean, even if you want to analyze it symbolically in the way to say um, that, let's say, ideologically, Ha-chan was bankrupt, and so there was a void there that could be filled and
Hmm.
replaced with the red ribbon, but it failed because it is a piece of not silver, white, it's the only piece of white that we see in the tower that is still uh possessed with a benevolent spirit.
Right. This is where he stored it away, but also I just kind of wanted to point that out that symbolically saying that we gave you a new life. It's like I gave you a new life. I gave you something and he's not appreciating that the thing that he gave him is something that is part of him and that he needs, right?
Hmm. And I think Eight appreciates it a lot, and that's kind of why he is trying to let White live.
Right.
Not only that, but his pacifistic nature. Now, I do also want to mention real quick that nature is subordinate to that heroic spirit because of what Goku said earlier about um, being killed by the adversarial spirit if one does not rise to the challenge, right? Eight would be a bystander in any civil conflict or issue, right? He wouldn't participate because he's a pacifist. Um, his spirit, we don't know how strong it is, but we do know that so far that's what we can tell. And so right now he's subordinate to Goku, but I'm interested to see our analysis as it goes on because we're a couple episodes away from some really good. The way Muscle Tower ends is really fantastic.
I'm excited.
So I think that's all. Is there anything else you want to say about this episode?
Nope, it just ends with them falling down into this hidden floor.
Into the darkness.
Right.
Hmm.
Back down into the darkness, back where Hachan was.
Yes.
Hachan.
Yep. And so, if you liked what you heard, please give us a like and subscribe. We're gonna continue releasing. I think the episode's just on a Sunday, Tuesday schedule. Also on Rumble, we're going to release, and this is something I should be mentioning in the beginning every time, that we also release on Rumble Monday and Wednesday after the uploads will come up on YouTube. A day later, we'll upload on Rumble, and hopefully very soon BitChute. So those things will be happening. Keep a lookout for those. If you use any of those platforms, please subscribe to us on there as well. And I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I think that covers all the bases. Just
All right.
leave us
Well,
some comments. Argue
yeah.
with us.
Please tell us if we're wrong. Tell us if we're right. Tell us anything. Please. Well, I'm your host on the Left Owl.
I'm your host on the right, Brock.
Have a good night, everyone.